In this presentation, we will use tax software to enter W-2 income. We will be using Lacert tax software owned by Intuit, the owner of QuickBooks. The data input process, however, should be similar for other types of software as well. We will, of course, be considering line 1, the revenue line or income line, when we're thinking about our tax equation. You'll recall that the standard W-2 will look something like this, although the weight, the shape, and form of it may vary. The boxes and data input will be much the same. This is going to be a mock W-2 that we put together in Excel. We'll give you the Excel worksheet so that you can put information into this type of W-2 format if you so choose for practice. The first W-2 form we're going to enter is going to be a fairly straightforward W-2 form. We're just going to say that the wages was $40,000, the federal income withheld is $4,000 in box 2. We had the Social Security wages also $40,000, Social Security withheld $2,480, and Medicare wages also $40,000 and the $580. So we don't have anything down below in the retirement plan. It's checked off, but there's nothing inserted into it. In that case, if that was the case, we would recommend, hey, maybe you should put some money, if you have it, if possible, into the retirement plan, because it looks like you have one at work, and if you have any money to put in there, that would be a really good benefit to have. If you don't have one, consider an IRA if possible. So then we're going to go back into our data input screen and say, all right, here's our data input screen. Now, I'm not going to enter a lot of information on the employer information, although we would need that as well on the tax return. We got the name of the employer and the address for it. The IRS does want to have that information. Notice as the software gets better, the IRS will often more and more want more information to kind of tie things out. So they're going to want that employer information there. And then we're going to say, I'm concentrating in on the calculations here. We're not checking off the retirement plan. And we're going to say that the wages are going to be the $40,000. Now, as I do this, I put in $40,000. Let's see what will happen without me entering any data into the other wage fields and the Social Security information. It populated, you'll note, the Social Security wages at $40,000. Now, that might not be correct because there might be some kind of difference, as we saw in a prior presentation. We'll see shortly. But once we have that $40,000 in there, it calculated for us that $2,480 in the Social Security withheld. Why? Because it's basically a flat rate. It can do that. There's our number, $2,480. It's easy for it to do that. It cannot do that. It didn't do that, you'll note, with the federal income tax because it's too complicated. We have no idea with the progressive tax system and different types of revenue and whatnot. We couldn't possibly know what that is. But the system can basically just generate this because it's basically a flat tax. So it gave us that. It gave us the Medicare. Once we have that, it just simply calculated the Medicare withholding as well. So that means that all we have to do, if that's all correct, is just verify this number, the federal number, and say, all right, what's in this number? There's no way the system could possibly know that number. And it happens to be 4,000 for us here. So we're going to say 4,000. And that's going to be our data input. And I'm just going to take the numbers now. Again, I'm not going to put in the information for the employer ID and whatnot, which for our mock example. If we then go up to the tax forms, let's see what would populate in the tax forms. We have a single individual that we're talking about here. Scrolling down, no dependents. It's in 40,000 in box 1 of our income type format, or the income location on our tax calculation, tax formula. That's the only income we have. Therefore, it totals up to that 40,000 down below. Then we have the 12,200 because we're taking the standard deduction. So we have the standard deduction for single, as is on the side here. 40,000 minus that 12,000 gives us the 27,800. That's basically our taxable income. Can we verify that if we looked at that and just did this by a formula? Let's take a look at our worksheet and say, well, here's our worksheet. Here's line 1. I could say, where's that 40,000? How would we feed into that? I'm going to use another sheet on our system to do that and say that's W-2 wages of 40,000. Income then adds up to the 40,000 that's carrying over to sheet 1. There's the 40,000. That makes sense. We don't have any adjustments that are, I would call, above the line adjustments or deductions for adjusted gross income, Schedule 1 deductions. AGI then would be at 40,000. We're taking the standard deduction because it's single, 12,000, and therefore subtracting that out, that gives us the 27,800. Then I'm going to rely on the tax return to figure out what the actual tax will be for the second half of the return. Go into the second half of the return, we're going to say All right, it calculated the tax at the $3,145. Now, if I go back into our worksheet, that's what I'm gonna basically depend on the form for. So the actual tax that was calculated was 3,145. Now, the other thing we know from the W-2 is the amount of payments we had. So if we look at the W-2, we recall that we had the 4,000 in box 2 of payments. So 4,000 on the payments, that's going to be down here on the bottom of the line. I'm going to say that's going to be in my credits and payments. I'm going to say we paid 4,000 on that W-2. Go back over. That'll feed into the 4,000 here. And therefore, if we had a tax of the 3,145, we paid 4,000, I would expect to see a refund of the 855. If we go back to the taxes, we're going to say, all right, there's the 3,145. There's the 3,145. Then we had line 17 says the federal income tax withheld from the W-2 is 4,000, and then if we subtract those two out, we're going to get a refund on line 19 is more than, which is the amount we overpaid. Amount we want refunded is going to be that 855. So that's going to be the, now notice what we don't see on here are all the information basically for the Social Security and Medicare, because that's not, well, it's not within the calculation for basically generally the federal income tax return. So notice what we're using here to verify this number are these two numbers for federal income taxes. And if we had state taxes, it's typically going to be the numbers down below. Okay, let's take a look at another example. Well, let's take a look at this one and plug this into the system. So I'm going to go back to our software. I'm going to go back over here and let's just change this to one. Actually, let's just delete this whole thing and then say job 1 again. And we're going to say this time 150,000. And let's just see what populates for us. Nothing happens here. It capped it for us at 132,900. Why? Because the software can do that. It knows where the cap is. And therefore, it can just populate that, and therefore it calculates the 8,240 for us. So if we go back to our W-2, that's the 8,240. We should be able to just basically double check that with the software. This is at 150,000 because there is no cap. That's what it is on our return. It basically populated that for us. And there's the 2,175, which is the Medicare that was withheld. So if we then go to the tax forms and see what's going to be calculated on that, back to page 1, we're going to say that we had the 150, standard deduction 12,200. That gives us the tax above, or the actual net income or taxable income, 137,800. If we recalculated that over here, we'd say on our worksheet, we'd say, well, the only income is the 150. We took that from box 1, and we're still at the 12,000 deduction. There's the above part, the 137,800. Then we're going to have the actual tax that's going to be calculated on the second page. Second page, we have the actual tax, 27,247. So I'm going to put that into our worksheet, 27,247 into the worksheet. And then we know that we withheld on our W-2 37,500. So 37,500 withheld. So if we go back over and say we want the credits and payments, 37,500. If there's nothing else involved, we can do our little worksheet and think that we should think to come out to 10,253. Back to our tax software. If we go to page 2, we had the 27,247, and I didn't notice I didn't put in the withholdings. If I go back to my data input, and I didn't put in the federal income tax withholdings, which are the 37,500. So we're going to put in 37,500, see what that does now. Back to our forms, and then we subtract those two out. We should get the 10,257. There's the withholdings on line 17, 10,257, and we can kind of double check that with our worksheet that's kind of more closer to a by hand worksheet, just straight formula. So I just think it's nice to have, to put that in two places. You get some kind of verification on that. All right, so let's do one other one, or at least one more. So now we have a difference between box 1, 3, and 5, and we have something in box 12B. So let's enter that in place. I'm going to go back over here. I'm going to delete this one. And I'm going to go back into job one, and we're going to enter this and say that we have 140,000 in wages, 140,000. And once again, it puts the cap there. That looks correct. Social Security looks correct. So let's just double check that. We're going to say that we have Social Security is correct. That looks correct here. But it didn't put the Medicare right because there's a difference between box 1 and box 5. So I'm going to go back over here, and it guessed for us 140,000. That's not right because it guessed that because of this number. It's actually 150,000. And then, whoops, not 15, 150,000. And then this number will populate for us automatically because that's going to be 6.2% of it at 2,174. So 2,174. So there we have that. Now, why were those two numbers different? Because there was an amount that was populated in box 12. So box 12 had this 10,000 in it with a DD in it. Okay, so in our data input screen, we should be able to say, all right, is there a box 12 that we can scroll down to? I see a box 12. Here we go. And then we have a code, and this software actually gives you the names of the codes. We have employer cost of employer sponsored. And I'm actually going to go back over and change that to D. So DD is a common one you'll see too, but I'm going to put it back up to D up here, and then check out the code for D, which is the elective deferral to the 401k plan, which is going to be a common thing that you'll see on the W-2s, and that was for 10,000. 10,000. So there we have that. Let's see what will populate if we then go back over to our forms. And we're going to say that on line 1, we're going to have the 140. So again, of the numbers we're going to be using box 1 to basically calculate. The rest of it is pretty much kind of like information stuff for the IRS for the most part. You know, it might not be used for the actual calculation of the tax formula. If I was to plug this into our system then and just do, okay, how would I double check this? Well, the income up top was 140. We're going to use box 1 in the actual calculation of the taxes. So we got the 140, the 12,200 standard deduction. That brings us to the 127,800. Can we verify that over here? 140, 12,200, 127,800 looks good. Tax that then is going to be calculated on it, 24,847. 24,847. So I'm going to put here 24,847. Then the withholdings that we had were the 35,000, which I don't think I put in the tax return again. And then we're going to have over here 35,000. So I'm going to say this was 35,000. And then go back to page 1. So you would think then we'd have a refund of the 10,153. So to do that, I got to put the withholdings into the tax return. 35,000 here. 35,000 back to the forms. And then, so there we have it. And there's our withholding. There's our tax. That comes out to the 10,153. So that's just some quick examples on how to read the W-2 form and basically how you can interpret what's going to be the tax calculation and how you're going to input this information into the system and research any kind of questions on it. Now let's give one more example where we could have a problem with, say, the Social Security information, just how that could line up. Let's say, for example, we had 2 W-2s. So now we had another W-2 for the same individual, and because there were 2 different jobs, they both withheld up to the cap. But there's a cap of this 132,900. So they're already at the cap, right? They're made over 40,000, and now they worked another job where they made 50,000. The second job, if they didn't, they may not know that they already hit the cap up here, and therefore they're going to be paying Social Security on that 50,000. So now, in essence, they've overpaid on the Social Security by the 3,100, right? Because it should be capped at that amount, at the 8,240, because it should be capped at the 132,900. They had 2 jobs, so now they got 2 jobs. So that's one instance. If you see that happen, and you go back to the forms, you're going to say, hey, I don't even, I shouldn't see the Social Security stuff doing anything to it. But here you'll see that on box 18D, you see this 3,100, and you're like, well, where did that come from? And again, if you verify your tax calculation with an outside software or just an Excel like this, you can say, well, it's not what I expected, right? If I had another 50,000 here, and I said that my worksheet was 50,000 here, and we go back to the tax form, and I would say, all right, now the tax is at 38,213. So the tax you would think would be at 38,213, and the withholdings that we had between the two W-2s was the 35,000, and then we said we withheld another 5,000. So I go back to the withholdings and say we withheld another 5,000 on the second W-2. So total withholdings are at 40,000. I would think the refund should be that 1787, right? You would think you'd have 1787, and if you go back to the forms, you'll say, something comes out. It came out to that 4887. Why? Because you're going to say, well, you had this line. Why did that line pop up? Because there's that double in the Social Security, right? And so that's going to be your difference. And so you can kind of verify it with your calculation, with an outside calculation of it. If I was to remove that Social Security and then go back to the forms, then our calculation would be at the 1787, and you can kind of double check that 1787 without an outside calculation. So it's kind of useful to use another Excel worksheet to do that. And if you see multiple W-2s for high income individuals, it's possible that they will end up overpaying the Social Security in a situation such as that.